of traffic. In this city, if you haven't noticed yet, we live in the edge of the chaos, yes? So anything can provoke what you just suffered today. So I would excuse ourselves to the people who are already connected, waiting since 10 o'clock for the transmission. And well, they don't live in Mexico City, or they have lived in Mexico City, so they know what I'm talking about, yes? So be very welcome now in a more relaxed way, yes? And I'm very glad, really very glad to welcome you at the Aesthetic Research Institute of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. This is home of the seminar on the music of New Spain and independent Mexico, known as Musicat. Yesterday afternoon, you visited us in our second academic home, and that are the archives and the choir book library at the Cathedral in Mexico City. This is the second time that we meet with professors and students from the Institute of Sacred Music of Yale University. The first one was in 2006, so quite a long time ago. I think Martin was already there, because I think I had the honor of you visiting my home, isn't it? Okay. So we are very interested in sharing with you thoughts and experiences that are the fruit of 22 years of collegiate work. According to the program, several members of the seminar will present a topic that we found interesting to share with you. After each presentation, your questions and comments will be very, not only welcome, but they are needed from our part. Presentations will last approximately, it varies, between 10 and 15 minutes. Perhaps mine will be a couple of minutes more, but I hope you don't take it badly. After each, we will have around 5 minutes to answer questions, comments from your side. So you are really welcome, and we invite you courageously to do so, yes, to question us, because we like to be criticized. Either it's good or a bad critics. We always take it good because we always learn from. In the meantime, please be free to have coffee or to go to toilets or to just stretch on your legs, because as we are a little late, we won't have a formal coffee break, because if it's coffee break, then we will break it all. So we'll have to try to manage with the times, to the timing. So, but please be free to step out and come in again. My presentation is the first one, so let me introduce myself. I'm sorry. My name is Lucero Enríquez. I am a harpsichordist, art historian, and musicologist, and the general coordinator of Musicat. Diana Hernandez, VILAR, and I take advantage too. There are several members of the seminar in this room. They don't have little papers, because we said the little papers are for the academics of Yale and the presentators, but they are here in the room, and I'm very proud. And only Maestra Flora Sanchez, she is the correspondent of the historical part of the seminar of historian. So he's an art historian. She won't take part in the presentations, but I want to present her. And here are other graduate students, yes, very proud of them. So they also are part, and they are also connected with us on the distance. So Diana Hernandez Villar is a graduate student in communication sciences from the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana. She collaborates in the Red Digital Musicat project and will help us with the chat on YouTube there, and now with my slide presentations, because I get so in the paper that I cannot be clicking here. So I will start. Could we have, Claude, could we have a little bit less light? Because yes, we are not so very interested to look at, but that is interesting to look at. Yes, the less light, the better. And in the video, it has to be completely dark, to make it very emotional. But that is when Antonio comes. So when we started working at the chapter archives of Mexico's Metropolitan Cathedral, we were not fully aware that we would move between Escila and Charybdis. I'm referring to the historical musicology that had dealt with the music preserved in the archives of the cathedrals of Mexico. Some of the best-known published works had generated myths and prejudices, starting from preconceptions and creating constructions. Myths like the one that there were Renaissance sources in the archives, and the other frequently referred to that the works known until then were the tip of an iceberg of great musical achievements. Constructions and preconceptions such as the earliest chapel masters being authors of polyphonic works, or enlightened Novo-Hispanic noblemen being musicians' patrons. Prejudices such as considering tasteless nonsense the productions of the 18th century, and nameless miscellaneous that of the 19th century. Fortunately, we ignored it all and entered the archives with the sole intention of seeing what was there and how we were going to catalog it. Little by little, we confirmed the absence of Renaissance sources and the abundance of 19th century sources. Where had the Renaissance come from? And why had the 19th century been silenced? The second surprise was even bigger because it confronted a myth that has to do with the tip of the iceberg and great musical achievements. It is that of the splendor of the cathedral music. Although a myth can be considered as an inferior or distorted product of the understanding and opposed to a verifiable truth, it is recognized as plausible and persuasive as long as nothing better is available to talk about certain things. It is valid insofar it means it teaches something to mean, because it carries and transmits some type of value. The mythical splendor of cathedral music conveys to anyone interested in the New Spain that we had a musical past being splendid could be comparable for foreign European musical past. This assessment is part of an ancestral lineage of apologetic and fervent love for the homeland in the face of discrimination of all kinds that the conquered peoples have suffered. The bastardy and Indianness that consequences that have permeated the societies of what we now call Mexico and have survived throughout the centuries. It is in this historical context that the myth of the splendor of cathedral music was born and why it still persists. It is a manifestation of a nationalism resulting from colonialism that affects the identity of the Mexicans, of such an emotional depth that it goes beyond any political ideology, and that places it as a part of a cultural system that is still in force. This has resulted in the use of the term splendor in the sense of a boom or heyday when referring to the music that was written, performed, and preserved in the Cathedral of Mexico, leading to a biased conclusions in quantitative and qualitative sense. Today, we have cataloged what you see in the synthetic and somewhat strange numeralia there. In my opinion, it doesn't show such a splendor, especially if you look through a 19th century Central European lens. Neither great works nor famous composers appear, nor large amounts of music of any specific genre or style. On the contrary, the great historical gaps measured in years for which there are no works, as well as the scarcity of local and imported production, are surprising. From 1534 to 1660, there are no traces of music papers. The 154 villancicos that are preserved are dated from 1693 on. The attributable to a chapel master from circa 1600, either they are mythical or they suffered the same fate as others, as occasional works. They had to be replaced, hence they could be considered ephemeral art, as were the burial mounds and the triumphal arches. The registration of the authorship and the preservation of their material support differed from that given to liturgical or para-liturgical works, such as motets, that became part of the cathedral's canonical repertoire. It is no coincidence that the music that was preserved from this period, written in New Spain, is dispersed in 8 choir books that contain a meager repertoire of polyphonic works for the office and the mass, the oldest datable in circa 1600. In the music archive, the oldest work, and we showed it to you yesterday, those who were there at the archive, is a Laudate Dominum, formerly labeled as Andante Domino, yeah? Dated from around 1660, pardon, a work from Lopez Capillas. So again, where did the idea of the Renaissance come from? From the choir books? Today I can say that precisely the strange numeralia, with its excesses and omissions, with its gaps and precariousness, provides the spoken portrait of the Catholic cathedral of the periphery of the Spanish Empire. It is in the attempt to fill the gaps or to swell the precariousness that constructions and preconceptions come into play in the absence of empirical evidence. The foregoing leads me to the third surprise. To see the Cathedral of Mexico with a music chapel constituted and functioning in the manner of the peninsular ones, with chapel masters who were composers and who followed one another uninterruptedly as in the metropolis, was a construction, all that in turn generated a preconception, to the point of inventing the existence of a first chapel master without a name, without data on his origin, without any record of his action, but who leads and heads a list where he appears as having spent 3 years in that position. So far it goes. That chapel master were not such, at least not in the first 50 years of the existence of the Cathedral of Mexico. Having believed, and alas, continue believing, that because you are dealing with a cathedral on the Spanish colony, you can deal with it as if you were dealing with one in the peninsula, inevitably leads to results such as the one indicated. It goes against true knowledge to apply the same terms to different realities, not realizing that a new reality, completely unknown to those who lived it and reported it, requires approaches not previously applied. If one does not identify a construction, one ends up feeding it. Worse still, the preconception that the construction generates makes innovations invisible, standardizes differences, automates processes, and nuances are lost for the sake of obtaining the preconceived model. I quote, "By letting ourselves be guided only by what we saw in documents, papers, books, and other testimonies, we discovered collective practices that had not been talked about, improvisation practices that had not been studied in depth, and characters that we knew very little or nothing about. With surprise, we saw how a much richer, more colorful, and interesting panorama appeared than the one provided by the canonical historical musicology. This is how we also discovered with astonishment first the construction and then the preconception. Why did the first cathedral in Mexico have almost nothing in common with any other cathedral in Spain? Well, let's see. Number one, the Spanish conquest was not a colonization. It was the result of a very bloody war of an economical, ideological, military nature, which attempted to annihilate the enemy, extinguished their culture, and appropriate the gold and silver of the conquered territory. It was not a Black legend. It was history. It is history, and indeed it is very Black. 2. The cultures that clashed could hardly be compared. Here you can see, Quetzalcoatl and the Christ. They are all from the same period. You can see Quetzalcoatl and the Christ. You can see the Treaty of Tordesillas, where the world was divided into the Western world, and a codex. And you can see the Cathedral of Segovia around the 16th century, and the Teocalli, the great Teocalli in Tenochtitlan. Nothing to be compared. In Tenochtitlan, number 3, the temples were destroyed to their foundations. With those blood-stained stones, and this is not a metaphor, it was real, the construction of the Iglesia Mayor began in 1524. That's the antecedent of the Cathedral of Mexico. 4. Each individual who arrived in those lands in those first post-conquest years was the bearer of his knowledge, traditions, and ambitions, whether they were heavenly, to build a New Jerusalem, for example, or earthly, have some silver lingots, by the way. The friars and clerics survived on tithes and slave labor. The crown did not pay them salaries, as in the metropolis. There were no choirs, no convents, no libraries where they could learn more and where they could get nourishment to enrich in their tradition. What Peninsular Cathedral could be compared to that of the nascent floating city, which could barely stand upright and with a chapter of only 7 members, including the bishop, who performed multiple functions with minimal resources? How to think that there could have been a chapel master in the Spanish style in those conditions? We are then faced with a historical musicology that used and continues using concepts and words that make sense in a European reality to name things that make little or no sense in the American reality. If we saw all that in the macro level, what about the micro level? The word motet, used to name form, style, genre, repertoire, indistinctly. Everything was a motet, according to some Spanish, very well-known historian. A complete set of matins considered as a work of one author, even as an opera. Yes, published works. How to trust the words used then? After making the inventory of the musical archive, we reviewed catalogs from several countries with the multidisciplinary perspective of the seminar where this project was born. Library science, codicology, art history, cultural history, paleography, sociology, restoration, conservation, and computer science have helped us since then to look at things differently. From the beginning of the process, we strive to leave behind prejudices, myths, and inherited terminology. We seek to approach its document in the archive with the same respect and attention, without exercising any value judgment, letting each document speak for itself and lead us to its cataloging through detailed observations of all its elements. We considered that not only the file as a whole, but even the smallest page written in pencil were sources of information, whereas they were marks of the life of the works, signals of transformation in the musical life of the cathedral, or fragments of the life of the people who had directly participated in that past world. In other words, from the myth and macro preconceptions, we moved to an empirical microhistory. Each documentary unit, some very complex, was part of a legacy. It became necessary to create a new field in our database in order to register and explain this. We labeled it synopsis. The decision to make a genre our guiding principle in cataloging was of an essential nature. It required delving into each of the factors involved in the concept of genre, that is, title, musical content, and function. Drew Davies will go further in this matter, but I only want to mention that the function was key because they were works from the archive of the Cathedral of the Spanish Empire settled in a conquered territory in which the original culture was destroyed and prohibited, and in which the Catholic religion was imposed as a conquest and domination ideology. The cathedral and its chapter were one of the institutional arms of the imperial rule. And music, inseparable from the Catholic liturgy, served to unfold that liturgy, and that was its function, nothing more. Understanding liturgy as a rite and ceremony as the visible representations of the liturgy. If the music was well made and well performed, fine. If it wasn't, it didn't matter, as long as there were music. If there was no chapel master for 10 or 20 years, it didn't matter, as long as someone kept singing. Taking care of educating and training musicians was never a priority for the chapter, neither for the chapel masters who came from abroad. Nor was there a vice-regal chapel, nor a nobility sponsoring musicians. On the contrary, they used those from the cathedral. We only find this line of transmission of knowledge in Puebla and to a lesser degree in Mexico City during the 17th century. Painters whose art had a higher cultural value than music in New Spain society had a guild to protect them and to control the quality of their work. They also had a well-established apprenticeship system. On the contrary, cathedral musicians were protected socially and economically by its walls. Once inside, they had nothing to worry about, even Jerusalem. By virtue of the royal patronage, for 300 years, the Church of New Spain was subject to the Spanish crown, not to the Rome, not to the Pope, and to the Council of the Indies, and to the peninsular monopolies for the importation of printed and handwritten music. Its belonging to the universe of the cathedral of this Hispanic world, characterized by the homogeneity in the repertoire and musical practice, was a faithful reflection of a globalized and imperial context. It was compulsory to follow the canon and forbidden to innovate. Any manifestation of acculturation in the music used in the cathedral ritual was unthinkable. What is catalogued today rather shows that the music in this primary venue seems to have functioned with a bare minimum. The precariousness ranged from the number of members of the chapter to the number of chapel masters born and trained in these lands, and from the erection of the cathedral in 1534 to the current situation. After the signing of the Independence Act in 1824, in this cathedral, there were times where the precariousness was not even sufficient. And you have an organist who played and everything in one person, yeah, because there was no money for anything else. An evident sign that there had not been any intention to sow. So from the flat nonsense of the 18th century emerged a true composer of international stature. He was European, and his music, of indisputable quality, is very easy to catalog. Unlike almost 100 notes from the end of the 19th century, you saw them yesterday, whose musical quality is not a matter of discussion, but which are very difficult to catalog. The little pieces of paper never mentioned before have given us a lot of light on musical practice and the situation of the cathedral in those last years of the 19th century. So this is how we have been reading and learning from the archive. In this manner, we have discovered myths and preconceptions. For sounding representations of both, I would strongly recommend an article written by Drew Davies in our Cuaderno 8. You can have one of these numbers there. He has a wonderful discovery where you can see in sound, you can hear in sound, all these preconceptions, those myths and these constructions, yes? So how do they sound like? So I thank you very much. And now we are open to questions, criticize, and even to be burned in green. How do you green wood? Yeah, please. Please, will you please use the microphone? That is for the persons who are connected, otherwise they don't listen. That I will ask, please. Anyone who is free to talk, but please, you have to approach one of these microphones. So, they will tell you. I think it's. Gracias, Adriana.
Thank you. So when you were discussing the types of work in the archives, you mentioned ballroom dances, which struck me as something funny to find in the archive of a cathedral. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about secular music and its inclusion in this body of work. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we were also very surprised that you have 365 or something like that, waltzes, and even very forbidden music. Yes, how do they come? Why are they trying to build the way? It is very difficult. There are really lines of research in that respect, but we do have them, and we have to catalog. They are cataloged. In fact, Analia, our colleague, which is I think she's connected in YouTube, she is also co-responsible of the catalog, and she is going to be responsible for number 7, number 7 of our catalog, which is dedicated to secular music, dance music, instrumental music. So we cannot tell you the path of it. Really, we heard, for example, of the waltz. The first example of the waltz is in 1817 about, and it is a very strange waltz that is it's actually like a baroque trio with a violin and a keyboard, yeah, but it says waltz, and it is a waltz, a 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, yeah. And apparently it was one member of the chapter was also a part of the university, of the Royal University, and he kind of offered this as a cadeau, as a gift to the team in the time. So at least that waltz, and it's a very early waltz, I said, in the setting of a baroque trio. Well, we know because of of what is written there, how it come inside the archive. The rest we have still to search for it, and that is what is interesting when you are really cataloging the thinnest note, the name. All those are hints to it, yes. And well, it's very easy to lose itself. I'm very bad cataloger because I really like very much of the gossip, and I start looking at, and oh, look how he uses this chord, and that is very bad for cataloging. One has to be, yeah. But it's very interesting. Exactly, you are invited to come here. Please stay here and work with us, trying to find the thread of one of these not sacred music, but really very worldly music. I don't know if I answered your question. But you are really strongly invited to help us with that, because really we need eyes, clever insights, and always questioning why, yeah, and not never given a certain answer, because mostly we are going to be wrong. Yeah, we have to, many times we have worked with this way, and then it was not like that. For example, matins, we couldn't understand like some sounds in the second volume. We didn't know why does these sounds come here. I mean, why does these counterfacts in this behind the, well, no, it's because with one vespers, formal vespers, if you put counterfacts to a couple of psalms, then you have 3 kinds of vespers: for the Virgin, for Christ, and for the saints. Yeah? Just by counterfacting a couple of them, and you change the text, and Paris case, so as we say in Holland. Yeah, so it's very easy. So, yeah, Mike.
Professor Enríquez, first of all, thank you from all of us for organizing this, and to your colleagues and students here. It's wonderful to be with you. And the second, to say that Sully Hart over here is an excellent dancer, I'm told. So he is your man to help you catalog that repertoire. Just kidding. It's just a clarification for me, because I think I missed something toward the beginning. You're using the word splendor. You quoted the word splendor, referring to this early age of music making in the cathedral. Is that your word? Is it a word in the archives? Is it a word from history? Who's saying that word?
I wrote an article. I wrote an article on that, but I'm not saying it's not my word. I wrote an article, and it is for the first time used, apparently, in a publication here in Mexico. I think it was published in 1976 or something. Perhaps they took it from Ricard, very well known book of what's the name? The spiritual conquest of Mexico. It's a French book of around, I think, 1960, I think. And I think he wrote, for the first time, he talked about the splendor of Cathedral, yeah, in general. And this man, Andres Lira, took it for the splendor of the music of the colonial times. Yes, I think I will gladly give you the article, which is published in one of our cuadernos, of the origin of this work, yeah, of this word. And in the Mexican, at least in the Mexican musicology, and also in musicology, historical musicology in Spain, they tend to use this word, splendor of music, but it has I know it has a connotation in the liturgy to give splendor to the cult. So that there's nothing to do with quality of quantity. So that makes splendor is cult, flowers,
Sure.
incense.
But you don't have a sense that it's a word that was used in that period. Let's call it the 16th, 17th century. They weren't using that word.
Yeah. Well, they use it in the chapter acts when they want to ask for more money for whatever. They say for the splendor of the cult, but always in this context, the splendor of the cult. Yes. We need an organist. We need a chapel. We need some appointments for the choir, for the splendor of the cult. Yeah. Always they use it in that context, not in the splendor of quality or quantitative music. Yeah.
The question behind the question is this a modern word used to create a kind of history, right? Is this a reconstruction of a glorious past? I think that's what you were trying to get at. I just couldn't understand everything, and I think I missed a line or two in there.
Yes, that's why I always quote it, because they are not my words.
Yes.
But it has become almost a mythical word. Yeah, the splendor, as heyday,
Yes.
as wow. Yeah, quantity and quality, and it is not. Well, I think it's not. Yeah. But it is used modernly in those terms.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comment or question? No? All right. So I think we finished here, and how do I present you first, Drew? Shall I present Drew and then I go outside? He can go directly. So Drew, my dear colleague and friend, he is a musician. It's a musicologist, quite well known now, full-time professor and researcher at Northwestern University in Chicago, and he's almost a founder of Musicat. He started working in the seminar about a couple of years after we were founded, and he's correspondent of the music paper cataloging, and he's co-editor of the catalog. So please, Drew, and he's also the academic coordinator of the seminar. Gracias.
Buenos dias, good morning, welcome everybody. Yesterday was really a wonderful experience in the archive. It's really a pleasure to share some of our research findings with all of you and have discussion about them. I'm trying to put the microphone a little further from me. I don't know how the sound will be. I was hearing a lot of echoes, so we'll try, but let me know if you cannot hear. One of the most important, ayudar, ¿verdad? Las diapositivas después, okay. Or I can do it. One of the most important decisions we made in developing the, thank you, Sylvia. One of the most important decisions we made in developing the Musicat catalog of manuscript and printed music of Mexico City Cathedral has been the fundamental division of material by genre rather than by composer or other attribute. The composer does count as a secondary division. This turned out to be intellectually rewarding and a prescient decision for such a large and diverse archive, as it has enabled us not only to focus more closely on cathedral ritual practice and its changes over a period of centuries, but has allowed us to surpass the scope of most cataloging efforts and achieve a reasoned representation of each musical work, rather than simply an inventory of sources. Looking at works grouped by genre has revealed to us the changing role of music itself in the cathedral, as we have engaged with diverse compositions written in different time periods for the same function, all together, rather than focusing on all genres at once within the works lists of particular composers. This has encouraged us to refine our cataloging criteria for each genre by taking into consideration the unique attributes and traditions shared by that genre across time. As such, each volume of our catalog has emerged from an intense learning process and dynamic interchange of ideas, the results of which give shape to how the data are presented, as well as to the content of the introductory essays, which explain genre characteristics, challenges, our decisions, and our discoveries. And we see here in the first side, the first 4 volumes. The blue one is Villancicos and Cantadas. The red one is All Music for Vespers, Psalms, antiphons, etc. The yellow one is All Music for Matins, Responsories, versicles, offices of the dead, etc. And the green one is hymns. The next one to appear will be, I think, colored pink, and will be the masses. Musicology appropriated the concept of genre from literary theory, where it indicates a class, type, or category sanctioned by convention. There is no endemic theory of genre in music studies, and hence the confusion caused by the use of the word in contexts such as online streaming platforms, in popular parlance, and even in scholarship, particularly of 19th century music. Since the 1980s, literary genre has been interpreted by scholars, Heather Dubrow and others, not as a typology, but rather as a social construction that serves as a sort of contract between author and reader. Carolyn Miller defines this as typified rhetorical actions based in recurrent situations. In earlier Germanic musicology, genre or Gattung was determined primarily by form and instrumentation. But this type of classification does not work well for genres that might take a multiplicity of forms. For example, the villancico, or even the mass ordinary. Indeed, the function, the sung text, the performance context, the changing connotations of titles, and the musical gestures in the work itself constitute some of the rhetorical actions that define music genre. And in our own work, we consider genre to be determined by the interaction among a work's title, its musical content, including form, and performance function. Understanding genre in this dynamic way indicates that the concept is not a typology, but rather a category sanctioned and understood by social convention. Thus, as in literature, the music genre communicates a specific network of recurrent rhetorical expectations for performers, listeners, and scholars alike. And a good catalog should take this into consideration through its curation of the material. Many catalogs of music manuscripts are made by librarians, but we are music scholars with backgrounds as performing musicians, and we have designed our work for the use and benefit of musicians, thereby embracing the shared network of expectations and meanings that the social construction of music genre permits, rather than following now outdated 20th century concepts of data science designed, regardless of discipline, for card catalogs, which is what the majority of catalogs of music manuscripts still do. Before becoming involved in the Musicat cataloging project, I had worked independently on a catalog of music of the northern Mexican Cathedral of Durango, published here at the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas in 2013, which is arranged according to composer. For that work, I had consulted several dozen published catalogs in order to understand best practices and develop a format that would be user-friendly, yet intellectually rigid. Surprisingly, I found some of the most compelling work to be in recent catalogs of music archives in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil, mixed with classic composer work indices, such as Kirchhoff, Deutsch, Hoboken, and Ryan. Durango Cathedral, which is probably the third largest archive of colonial music in the Mexican Republic, has about 900 works, originally created between 1730 and 1830. Mexico City Cathedral has a collection 4 times that size, over a period almost 3 times as long. Many elements of the design of the Durango Cathedral have informed that of our catalog, but the major events, originally conceived as a way to manage workflow for the larger archive, is the turn towards genre as the fundamental division of material. Let's consider, for example, 2 hymns, one an autograph score by chapel master Ignacio Jerusalem, composed around 1760, the other a pencil sketch of a chant melody written by an organist around 1895. And we looked at some of this material yesterday. A composer-based approach would have grouped Jerusalem's hymn together with his other approximately 260 works, which share the galant style and orchestral scoring. Indeed, Jerusalem is unquestionably the most important composer to have worked at the cathedral. Our colleague Javier Meni Lopez and I have actually recently established his updated biography and updated works list in a different set of publications, selected works edition coming out in Spain. But focusing that way here in the catalog would have castigated the hymn tune on the right to some sort of marginalia. Indeed, for cataloging purposes, such seemingly insignificant manuscripts from relatively recent history were ignored when the music manuscripts were microfilmed in the 1960s. E. Thomas Stanford mentions them as countless miscellaneous manuscripts. Or sin número de músicos, de manuscritos musicales, that's what he said. But by reviewing all hymns together and identifying the many untexted chant melodies in the pencil sketches, we discovered that there are enough pencil sketch hymns written on scrap paper to cover the entire liturgical year, written out as a guide for improvisation or choral direction at a time when the role of the organist was increasingly modern and akin to modern practices today. These more than 80 pencil sketches complete one of 3 hymn cycles present in the cathedral, one from the 16th and 17th centuries, mostly by Francisco Guerrero and found in the polyphonic choir books. A second one dating from the 18th century with small orchestral accompaniment, mostly by Ignacio Jerusalem and Antonio Juanas, and a third written on scraps of paper for the organ to direct. The lesson here is that seemingly worthless documents led to a profound understanding of change in musical practice and culture. Not only does the researcher have to catalog everything without bias, we should figure out what we are looking at and not just simply register the existence of a folio. This is just one example of many difficult questions that have arisen about genre since the very beginning of our collaborative research. And very often such questions overlap with the work concept itself. For example, what genre is a choral villancico that has a solo aria embedded? What genre is the respond of a gradual that is presented without its verse and labeled responsory? Or what is a hymn positioned within a printed European mass ordinary of the 19th century? In all of these cases, multiple possibilities might be true, either because of different uses at different times in history, or due to music, especially in the 19th century, being conceived flexibly from the outset for use on different occasions. Questions such as these, on top of the very large number of contrafacts among the works in the archive, have led us to approach collections separately from individual works and explore how the social construction of genre encourages the creation of in-between spaces rather than rigid classifications alone. Finally, does a multi-movement matins service with an invitatory hymn and 8 responsories count as one work or 10? What if it were written as individual works over a period of 50 years by multiple composers and then assembled into a collection by a third party with newly copied parts? I want to just briefly walk through a series of slides with an example of that. We looked at part of this yesterday, but here we can see more clearly, and then that will conclude my presentation. No, this one's good. Oh no, the So here we see the title page, 8 responsories, very clean. This looks like it's one work, homogeneous and whatnot, and these are the parts to perform a work around 1800 in Proxima. Here we see the contents of this responsory cycle for the Virgin of Guadalupe. There are 8 responsories. This was the work recorded by Chantecler about 15 years ago. Several of those responsories are not in the recording, but 6 of them are in Proxima. However, when we dig into the material, we find that there is less homogeneity than that title page would have implied. For example, you see the bundle of scores. They're even written on different sizes of paper that turn out to be created over about 50 years. The vertical piece, which is the oldest of the responsories, is an autograph of Ignacio Jerusalem. It was sewn together with the other scores in the early 19th century. They even folded the top of the vertical page over. And you see there's a different handwriting below. Here we see the handwriting of Antonio Juanas, indicating that the second responsory is a contrafact that he made using Jerusalem's music, but in fact he arranged the music as well. It's quite different. Here the note says where the contrafact came from. It actually came from an ode called Al Combate, which is now recorded by the Chicago Arts Orchestra and available on Spotify or else, for ephemeral music written in 1761 for a poetry contest at the University of Mexico, which was very close to the cathedral. Was used once. Juanas found it, said, oh, let's make this into a responsory. And there he did. Proxima, por favor. But you see, Jerusalem had other ideas about the scope of this work. One of his responsories that supposedly is for the Matins of the Virgin of Guadalupe, he called a motet, which is a bad word. We know it's a very difficult word when you're cataloging something where we don't have motets with free poetic texts as you do in printed European collections. And this is for the Virgin of the Pillar, which was the patron of Zaragoza, Spain. Different feast day, but the same responsory reused. So in fact, Jerusalem had one idea for its function. Juanas had another idea for its function. Proxima. And it's quite ironic, actually, that this national symbol of Spain would be repurposed as a national symbol of New Spain in the Creole context during the insurgency period by Juanas. It's very, very interesting to get into the social ramifications. So here we see what the real contents are. It's very messy. There are 8 works, 2 composers, 3 contrafacts, 1 arranger, and 1 collection. And we've tried to make a way so you can see all of this at different stages in our production. Here's how it appears in the catalog. We already saw the synopsis in Lucero's presentation, but you see there's a double incipit where we really want to explain this so that a group, if you perform this, can use this as a program note instead of innocently saying this is the splendor of the music of the Virgin of Guadalupe or whatnot, which is what people tend to do because there is not material like this. Well, there's something that can be turned into, unpacked and turned into a larger program. So all of this has been made possible by turning toward music genre as the primary documentary division, and then approaching each news piece with an open mind and a willingness to engage with what we're looking at. Thank you. I'm happy to take any question if there's time for one or two. Unity.
Thank you so much, Drew, and everyone for welcoming us here at the headquarters of this important research institution. And thank you so much for clarifying. So, well, it's very easy to follow you and to understand the magnitude of this, of the archive and all the time. I mean, it's a project that has taken a lot of time and a lot of thinking. But I was wondering if, if the catalog, if the genre is the center or the principal category, you know, the central aspect to catalog the music, if that has affected as well the way in which the music is stored in the archive, if it has changed the order.
No, it has not. We have only moved papers when it involves reunifying things that had been separated in the archive, or if things were incorrectly put together as manuscripts. So everything is practically in the same order that it was, which is actually not according to genre or really anything. It is arranged. Traditionally, all of the work of Juanas was first, and then the work of some other composers, then the work of Jerusalem and Torres de la Roca, and then sort of alphabetical order by composer of pieces by Spanish composers, and then sort of alphabetical order of pieces by Italian composers, then the miscellany of everything where there are thousands of pages. And then it starts again where there was more Juanas and then more Jerusalem. So it's more or less preserved, but the order I don't think is the most historically important one. But in any case, there's indication if anything's been moved, it's indicated in the database. That type of data is not in the printed catalog because it's too much, but it's in the electronic catalog. What I will say is it made it, for each catalog, you have to pull a piece from here and a piece from there and a piece from there and a piece from there. So working by genre meant a lot of fetching, a lot of different things, but it was worth it.
I was just imagining, for example, in that complex work that you just explained to us, right? The Jerusalem and then the other authors and then different. So it's virtually impossible to separate in different places, but I just wanted to hear from you, how does it work, that logic?
My dream, and Lucero knows many of my dreams about this, is that the archive will be historical and put away and closed, and everything will be digitized, and the order of the archive is the order that the user would like the archive to be in. And so I say I have my genre thing, but maybe somebody else is interested in the type of paper. So order the archive by the type of paper and see what you discover and find. And we're going to have to live in a virtual world in the 21st century. And that's why I sort of hate these things on card catalogs, that the organization of the archive should be how the user would like the archive to be. And we can do that technologically now. So we should eventually.
Thank you. We have a question on the chat. Is Rodrigo Valenzuela, and he asked, I would like to ask Maestro Drew to please expand the idea of the modern style of playing for the organist around the 1700s.
Say that one more time.
Said, to please expand the idea of the modern style of playing for the organist around the 1700s.
The 1700s, the style of the organ. So I would say in the 18th century, there's multiple ways the organist will be playing, as a continuo instrument and as a solo instrument. As a solo instrument, it's going to be mostly improvised, but you're going to have verses of hymns, verses of Magnificat, solo music to use at different parts of the Mass and the offices. And that's going to be very much according to the skill and education of the individual organist. As a continual player, I think for the most part, the organ is not the great organs that are up there, but a more portative organ that would have been with the other musicians playing from a figured bass, probably along with a harp and a bassoon, in order to accompany both power liturgical music like villancicos and psalms and other music. So I think it also will depend upon the organists themselves. We have, if we look at the recorded history, for example, everybody mixes the colonial music with Gaspar Sanz or with Cabanilles, but we actually don't have any evidence that those composers were performed here. They could have been, but my view is slightly different, that there probably was very intense improvisation based upon chant melodies, based upon other melodies that were in the repertory, and those were used every context from independent toccatas to making versets for the even numbered versets of hymns and magnificats. So there's a lot of different ways the organ would be there, and it changes even more when you get into the 19th century.
I would say to what Irari just asked, that we are very proud that we have incorporated a concept that RISM didn't have, and that I think it's suitable for archives as this from Mexico. That is the concept of collection of collections. But you say, what's that? Well, if you think that a mass is a collection of single works, if you think that the matins is a collection of single works, because for cataloging according to RISM standards, collection is everything more than 2 pieces in a piece of paper. That's a collection. Yeah, one piece and another work, that makes a collection. So what do you do when you have matins, where they have a piece of organ somewhere attached to it, and then you have a mass attached to it, and they are indivisible? So we had to make kind of very strict, we name it collections of collections, and Juanas is one of these collection of collections from origin, because he wrote the matins for St. John, and then he attached the whole bunch of texts only, and he says the instrumental parts are the same as these St. John's. Yes, these are for another, I don't know, the other festivity. So you have sewn together the two set of manuscripts, of partitures. That is a collection of collections, because they are inseparable and they need each other. So with all these contrafacts that you have to sing them with the music, with the instruments of the other, and you only have the texts, the new texts with the old melodies adapted only for the syllabic reasons, well, then you have a collection of collections, and they are inseparable. That is one thing you cannot turn apart. So we invented that. Well, I not invented that. We contributed to the international catalog, whatever call it, with that concept. And then also the factitious collections, that are collections that are not born, that we had to make them in the archive already, because we respect the order, but then we have to integrate things that they were loose. I mean, what do we do with this? Well, this actually belongs here, yeah? So we make a factitious collections, yeah? And sometimes a contrafactual collection gives us light as what was the original pieces, if the hymn, for example, an invitatory, they were together or not. And then we find that some hymns and invitatories are like freelance. They can be for Mary or they can be for a virgin, yes? So you don't have to make a collection of them, because they were used either way, yeah? So we make a little chapters that said fictitious collections. I mean, if you want to have a whole Guadalupe, the matins, and you have these responsories, and you can use this hymn. So, but we didn't do it physically. We just propose it as a bad thought, yeah?
Flexible use.
Very much true. Yeah, all right.
But if we need to move on, it's okay.
Is it quick?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering about the relevance of the cataloging by genre to places that are not the Mexico City Cathedral. If you would imagine that there are similar kinds of collections that are across time and across composers that we might discover in other cultural pockets of the world.
Absolutely. And whether or not the catalog is presented that way, from my experience, I highly recommend the workflow going that way, because that way you can understand what the genre from different time periods will all inform each other. So you'll better understand what you're looking at across periods. Whereas, and if you learn that one by one, then I think you'll have a better result than trying to do all the genres at the same time from one composer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Drew. So now we proceed to the third participation. Please I don't have to repeat it. Feel free to have coffee or have something else outside. You are always welcome to do what you please. Feel at home. So now I will present our third participant. Is Dr. Salgado, Silvia Salgado. She's a pedagogue and an art historian and a full-time researcher at the Institute of Bibliographical Research of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She's a correspondent of the Choirbooks Catalog Project. And Mariana Vázquez, at her side, who will read Silvia's paper, is a graduate student in music from the Universidad de las Américas, Puebla, and she collaborates in the Choirbooks Cataloging Project. So, please.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. Now I will read the paper, The Choirbook Library at Mexico City's Cathedral. Mexico City's Cathedral preserves a valuable artistical heritage consisting in 132 manuscripts and printed choir books manufactured between the 16th and the 19th centuries. The Cathedral Chapter and the National Autonomous University of Mexico signed an agreement to carry out the cataloging of the collection in 2004. The project. One of the premises of the project is that the choir books are complex cultural artifacts containing liturgical and musical repertoires, which are accompanied by formal, artistic, and material elements that must be approached with a multi- and interdisciplinary vision. In the project's first stage, a team of curators, restorers, and musicologists met and undertook the task to physically stabilizing the books and started the inventory of the collection that remained stored in the cabinets that are in the east transept of the cathedral. The project's second stage began in 2005. Not only with the basic task of cataloging and digitalizing the collection, but also designing and programming the database. The team increased with the addition of a computer science BCS and an art historian and a library science student. Every member was involved in the planning of the database called Choirbooks in Musicat. Each team identified and defined the fields needed to enter the information. The database was programmed to include 5 modules, and they are general data, musical and liturgical content, graphic and visual elements, binding, and conservation status. The first version was installed on each laptop and everyone worked it individually. Over the years, the database migrated to a server, and nowadays we work remotely and simultaneously in the cloud. One of the group's first agreement was to define the book's placement and classification. It was decided that its musical nature and liturgical content were decisive. So the first step was separating the plain chant books from the polyphonic singing books. Then the books were organized by masses or graduals and offices or antiphonarists. In the process, we realized that some books contained both branches. So we formed the third class we called various. Each branch was ordered according to the liturgical year and the hours of the divine office. In this way, we rebuilt the old choral library and identified some missing ones, such as the Advent celebrations. This is explained because part of the collection was taken to the National Museum of the Viceroyalty located north of Mexico City. The second stage concluded when the cataloging of the collection was considered finished. However, the review of the work done was pending. The third stage of the project consisted not only in reviewing and refining the systematization, but also incorporating choir books that were in the Turriana library of the cathedral. The latter has been the longest stage because those of us who continue in the project are not full-time. Some academics are volunteers and students work for a limited time period. The choir book library. In the cathedral's choir library, 118 books of plain chant and 14 of polyphony are preserved. The masses or graduals add up to 46 volumes that were mostly written and illuminated on parchment. 14 of them come from Seville and were liberated in the years of 1593 and 1594. This branch includes the oldest books in the collection, as well as 2 manuscripts made on industrial paper and 2 printed books from the 19th century. The offices or antiphonarists consist in 50 bodies of manuscript and illuminated books on parchment made in New Spain during the 17th and the 18th centuries. Unlike the masses, the offices have more information on the covers and colophons about the commissioners or patrons, copists, and illuminators, as well as the place and date they manufactured. The cathedral has 22 volumes in the set called Various, containing masses and offices, books that were modified or updated depending on the liturgy, so that there are celebrations or folios of older works inserted are called factitious bodies and are the predominant type in this set. There are 14 volumes of polyphony books made during the 17th and 18th centuries, 2 of which were printed in Salamanca in 1614 and in Madrid in 1703, respectively, while 11 of them were written on handmade paper. The oldest is Codex Franco II and contains works by the composer from Extremadura, Hernando Franco. From the chapter acts of the cathedral, it is known that it was written and illuminated on vellum around the 16th century. It has not been easy to establish the collection's chronological classification because most of the volumes do not include dates, and the old inventories preserved at the cathedral archives have very wide dating ranges. However, we have searched for clues, styles, and features in them that allow us to offer feasible dates. One of the elements that was provided chronological information is the artistic style of the illuminations, as well as we will see next. Styles and illuminations. Refined miniatures alluding to the New Testament and according to the celebration they embellished are boasted by most of the 16th century choir books and are accompanied by forms and motifs such as acanthus and grotesques. Most of them preserve the medieval traditions and techniques of making, copying, and illuminating manuscripts. Nevertheless, their plastic handling is mannerist, namely, their artistic style reveals the time of their manufacture. 26 bodies of books produced in the scriptorium or civilian workshop of Master Gaspar Riquelme arrived at the Mexico City's Cathedral in 1595. Diego de Zamora was subcontracted by Master Riquelme to make the distinctive letters of the choir books. Of this set, 14 volumes are preserved, and there is certainty about their dates by the archival documentation kept in Seville and Mexico City. There are a few books from the 17th century, and among them, there are graduals, antiphonarists, and various manufactured in the cathedral. 11 of them follow the style of the illuminator Luis Lagarto and were made by the copyist Lorenzo Rubio and the illuminator Lucas Garcia, who were active between 1598 and 1609, according to the chapter acts. One more, dictated to St. Peter, is dated in 1637. Antiphonarists with the signatures and styles of Juan de Dios Rodriguez and Sebastián Carlos de Castro, who worked together from 1723 to about 1750, were made during the 18th century. The Baroque style of the viceroyal world is appreciated in those. Andrés José Gastón y Balbuena was one of the most notable artists who worked in the 1760s for the cathedral. He made the so-called Liber Marianus or Marian book, which contains the office of the Assumption with a surprising invocation of the Virgin of Guadalupe, as well as the office of Corpus Christi. Two other notable artists are the Rococo brush Master of Roses, who was active in the 1760s, and the uniquely styled Master of Red Initials, who worked in the 1780s. The 19th century has the lowest production of choir books, historically due to Mexico's independence war and the continuous struggles between conservative and liberal governments. From that century, there are printed volumes or manuscripts that imitate the printed books preserved that recreate the neoclassical style. The most recent one is from 1899 and was made for the cathedral or on industrial paper with calligraphy closer to modernist typography and with a color print pasted on the cover of the Virgin Mary, but without statement of responsibility, as it happens in most of the 16th century choir books. Finally, throughout these years of work, we have reached a high level of interdisciplinary systematization, training of students in research, productive and respectful linkage between the church and the university to rescue, study, and disclose the documentary and bibliographical heritage in the Mexico City's cathedral. We are glad to receive your questions if you have any.
Thank you so much for your presentation. One question I had, I was impressed by the preservation of some of the books that we saw yesterday. They seem to be potentially in usable condition. And so I was just wondering if there have been any efforts made to incorporate the manuscript books into current liturgical practice of the cathedral. Yeah, just if that's something that's been explored.
La pregunta es que los libros están como en un estado de conservación, pero bastante deteriorado, que sí hay esfuerzos para que esos libros se puedan usar como en prácticas actuales dentro de la catedral, se pueden seguir usando. Es que todos están estabilizados. Todos están publicados, y estabilizados. Okay, first of all the books are stabilized, so they have been cleaned and they have been put like in a state so that they won't continue deteriorating with time. And all of them are digitalized. We have in the databases of Musicat all the pictures of the books, but they are not already been updated, right? La decisión de las conservadoras fue que no se interviniera más, porque la restauración puede resultar muy cara. Okay. And the decision made by the restorers was to not intervene them further because the restoration of the whole books could be really expensive. So they are just stabilized and digitalized, and the idea is to be able to consult them digitally so that they won't continue deteriorating. Okay, and nowadays the chanters of the cathedral, they use iPads to do the singing during the masses.
Thank you.
Is there any?
It is our hope that at the end of this year, Silvia, or beginning next year, we will have online we are working on the interface now. So you can have online the database with all the 16,000 images, around 16,000 images of every book. So you can really look them closer and better than if you have in reality. Yes. So we hope that for the end of the year, or perhaps the first 4 months or 5 months of next year, we will have everything, the database online. Yeah. With the interface, with all the images. So you can see the books very closely. So, some other question? No? No. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you very much, Mariana. Now, we proceed with Antonio Ruiz Caballero. He is now, he arrived yesterday, actually, at Brown. He's in Brown University with a scholarship there for 1 month. And he is connected just as Caro. They are connected by Zoom. And now I would like to have the room absolutely dark to make it very dramatic thing, because Antonio, you will see him there. Hello, Antonio. I don't know if you have slept well or not, but he has just arrived there and he was managing to check out the room before he goes to the apartment. I said in the hotel they have facilities so you can connect with us. Yeah, so he will be here. And he will start, he is an historian and a musicologist, and he's a full-time professor at the National School of Anthropology and History. His presentation starts with a video, and I think I have to put it. Ingeniero Yole. Excuse me. Antonio, this is the ghost of you. Claude, see, I need Claude. Claude is helping us with this. I have to go. And Adriana, could we have it absolutely dark? No lights. My name is Light, but that is the only light. No, su video. No, video de Antonio. Sí. So, you will understand why we are so dramatical, because when Pablo comes to his turn, he will talk about emotions. So we like to emphasize the emotions. We are all musicians, we're many musicians here and art historians, and we never talk about emotions, but now it's a question of emotion. So, gracias, Diana. So, of course, Credo, I think is Antonio, is number 4 presentation. Eh?
Just looking for.
Está en el... No, pero además tiene desde el principio, por favor. It has to be from the beginning. It's always the same with this technological thing. Yeah? No matter how much rehearsals. Desde el principio. Okay. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Credo in unum Deum. Entre la sierra y la costa de Michoacán se extiende Santa María Ostula. Su origen náhuatl la distingue de sus vecinos purépechas. Desde la época colonial, tuvo que defender su territorio y sus recursos de personas y grupos ajenos que buscaban apropiárselos. Esto y la falta de vías de comunicación determinaron que se convirtiera en una comunidad sin mucho contacto con el exterior. Distinta y única, autónoma y autosuficiente, es una auténtica comunidad cohesionada que conserva gran parte de las costumbres y creencias de siglos anteriores. Trabaja, se divierte, celebra, comparte. Y sus cantores cantan en latín, son autoridad. Patriem omnipotente, factor in celeste. Aunque la Iglesia Católica dejó de cantar en latín hace muchos años, es sorprendente que en la comunidad de Santa María Ostula aún se cante en esa lengua. Santa Trinitas unus Sus tres cantores testimonian hoy lo que durante siglos hicieron los encargados de la doctrina en pueblos indígenas de lugares remotos. Aprender de los evangelizadores la manera en que daban culto a Dios Qué barbaridad.
they're looking for circuit breakers to. Yeah. Let's just take 5 minutes and then I'll let people would like to. Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. See what happens. So what happens. So come back at 11. They have break. But you have the fire.
Sí, de acuerdo. Gracias.
De acuerdo, muchas gracias.
No, de acuerdo. Estamos aquí al pendiente.
Sí, yo
Gracias.
también estoy atento.
It's like if you're supposed to, we're gonna have our lunch now. Lunch now, and then we'll go back and. No. Monitoring the, I think your individual and the name of in this form. Yes, lectures here. Yeah.
Welcome to this unexpected way of presenting. ¿Again se fue la luz? No. Ingeniero Zamora, ¿qué pasó? don't know, ya no hay luz otra vez. Well, it's enough. I don't know.
So is mine.
Batteries, I think, battery. Well, but Martin, I ask you a question. LUISA proposes that after this trial or whatever aborted event, that we just say enough, goodbye, and then make a Zoom session after you are back in Yale and have an event in light, provided the light is okay. Yeah, the microphone, yes, but Lisa needs the PowerPoint too.
You pass. No, I will do one thing that is very important for the presentation. So data protection, okay.
And the action implied a very important recognition of Mexico's independence. This is the first time that Mexico really recognized as an independent country. It's not in paper, it's just in an action, okay? The appointments were the result of 5 years of diplomatic work of Francisco Pablo Vázquez. Vázquez became canon at the Cathedral of Puebla in 1806. He had a doctorate in philosophy, theology, spoke several languages, and had undeniable diplomatic skills. On April 25 of 1825, General Guadalupe Victoria, who was the first president of Mexico, appointed Vázquez as ambassador and minister this is a difficult word for me, plenipotentiary. He was then sent to Europe to negotiate the recognition of Mexico as an independent country. So basically, he had this was a canon that was sent to Europe as the first ambassador of Mexico and giving him an enormous amount of power. Vázquez traveled to London, Brussels, Paris, Florence, and Rome. His diplomatic skills were rewarded when Gregory XVI appointed him Bishop of Puebla. After such appointment, every bishop must be consecrated by another local bishop. However, Vázquez was in Rome, and there were not so many bishops in Mexico, so he returned to Mexico already consecrated Bishop of Puebla. In Mexico, he proceeded to consecrate the other Mexican bishops appointed by Pope Gregory, the total of 16. It's a lot. When Gregory XVI died in 1846, Vázquez was still alive and still Bishop of Puebla. So that can explain why Manuel de Plata would be so interested to contribute to the most grandiose and solemn funeral services possible, as one can read on the printed score and part that he copies. So this explains why they wanted to really, celebrate or commemorate more than celebrate Pope Gregory XVI. But then came the pandemic, and I could not continue working at the archive of Puebla. So I had to start working to look things at the archive of Mexico City, where Salvador was still working. So he was looking for me, certain things. I was telling him, please look on this date and please look on this date. And finally, between both of us, found information that suddenly made me doubt seriously if the Requiem had been performed in Puebla. Pope Gregory passed away on the 1st of June of 1846, when Mexico City was already mourning the death of its Archbishop, Manuel Posada, which had occurred 1 month before. Funeral services for both men were planned, one on late October and the other one on late November. However, in between these two deaths, on May 13, 1846, the US government had approved a declaration of war against Mexico. I thought it would be interesting for you to hear this conflict between Mexico and the United States from the Mexican point of view. Of course, I would clarify certain things. The minutes of the Cathedral of Mexico revealed that at the beginning, the clergy, as many Mexican citizens, were not fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. When the month of October arrived, the funeral services of the Archbishop and the Pope were deferred for 2 months, and the minutes of the cathedral literally state that most probably that was how long the war would take. Okay, so Mexico didn't take, I mean, first of all, there was not a war between two countries. It was really a takeover, you know, from the United States. But second, Mexico felt like too confident about being already independent, you know, having, I don't know, good troops. Well, they didn't know what they were confronting. Yet, the war persisted. 1 year later, the Cathedral of the and the National Palace were surrounded by American troops, and I was showing a very well-known painting, and then another well-known painting, which shows how on September 14 of 1647, the American flag was flying over the National Palace. That is an interesting one because you see the palace with only two floors, you know, and now the one that you saw has already 3 floors because it grew up after the independence, of course. You know. By then, the Cathedral of Mexico decided that the ceremonies of the death ceremonies could not be pursued, so they ordered 500 masses to be offered instead. You know, the high number of masses gives an idea of the importance of what was left out. Not only a solemn mass with the best music, but that no processions would have place either inside or outside the cathedral. There is another manuscript here in the Cathedral of Mexico by another composer, Gomez, who says that he wrote this for the death of the Archbishop of Mexico. And we now know that this was not performed. So my question was, well, what happened in Puebla? It also meant giving up the idea of building a funerary memorial. I'm sorry, I cannot show this. These temporary funeral altars, called catafalcos, túmulos, were quite tall and elaborate. They are still done sometimes. To give you an idea of how they look, I was giving you a picture of one built in 1903, but I don't know if they will send you that. Now, this map, I was also showing you the map, how it looks, how much Mexico lost, you know, and what was about Mexico, you know, 1849, after 1849. The Mexican-American War caused Mexico to lose 55% of its territory to the United States. US Congress finally decided they did not want to take all of Mexico, and it was very interesting. It is a discussion within the Congress that they realized that it was going to be too many different people, basically, and it was going to be uncontrollable, so they left the idea of taking Mexico, basically. After nearly 3 decades of political instability, Mexico certainly faced innumerable challenges, and the decades to come before reaching its current political division into 32 states. History, of course, is complex, and I should emphasize here that some Mexican regions were actually aiding the American troops because they wanted to become part of the United States. So this is, you know, it's a complex thing here to see. Now, before finishing, let us go back to Puebla. First, the funeral services of Pope Gregory VI are well documented, I discovered after the pandemic. So Mozart's Requiem was, most probably, it doesn't say that it was performed in the minutes, but you have the papers of Plata saying that it was copied for that. And we have also that they were paying musicians, so we can assume that they played the Mozart Requiem. And we are certainly, you know, for sure, that raised a very, very expensive catafalco. However, what amazes me is how the moment of history that I have described here is still present in the organization of the chapter room that you can see, you know, that already sent you the picture. I know that VÁZQUEZ, Bishop VÁZQUEZ, died during the invasion also. So his death is very interesting because, of course, No, they couldn't celebrate anything. Nothing was performed. Plata, instead of being copying Mozart, he had to be going to the Mexican authorities and saying, well, we need to transport the corpse from one place to another. And then he would go to the American troops, and say, please, 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 please let us pass the Archbishop over here, and they would say, well, as long as there is as this doesn't serve for another thing, you can pass. So the poor Archbishop Vázquez passed just by himself and a few others, through Cholula, because he died in Cholula, to Mexico to be buried, and nothing was ever mentioned about making any homage to him. In Puebla, the chapter room is right next to the sacristy, and it displays full portraits of every Archbishop of Puebla. The order begins below on the right side, and it goes around the room. So you can basically see on that picture that the paintings go around. No? On the right side, you cannot see. That's where the arrow is pointing at. I was going to show it to you, but it doesn't matter. We can see Bishop Palafox, who consecrated the actual Cathedral of Puebla in 1649. He's a man of utmost importance, not only in Puebla, but also in the history of Mexico. And it could be very difficult to summarize here his accomplishments, as well as the complex political life that he led. I do want you to observe, you can't, but imagine it, that as every other bishop or archbishop, he's portrayed as a prince with a coat of arms, in this case, 3 mitres. Please notice that, well, they are not on his head, they are next to him. And I wanted you to notice that all the portraits include, in the lower part, a basic summary of what they did as bishops or archbishops, The number of meters symbolize the positions that each one of them occupied. In the case of Palafox, there are 3, because he was Archbishop of Mexico, Bishop of Puebla, and later Bishop of Osma in Spain. Now, in the middle of the room, he holds also a strong presence in the form of a bust. So you can see on this picture, that is the main picture that I want you to be observing. You can see a bust there that is Bishop Palafox's bust. Vázquez's portrait is a very different, as it follows new rules of an independent Mexico. I don't know, Irene, if you have been able to send this one. So it would be interesting to see the comparison between the 2 pictures. Anything related to aristocracy was now forbidden. So there are no mitres, no coat of arms, nothing basically. So the portrait of Vázquez, just as his burial, is very, very square and, empty basically. Portraits of archbishops after the independence are much more austere, but this is the most austere one, because it's the first archbishop to die, in these circumstances, when the independence of Mexico was taking a lot of force, because they were also fighting against a foreign country. Now, it is interesting to see that Vázquez is shown with the portrait of Pope Gregory XVI and a document. This is the portrait that hangs on the room, on the chapter room. However, there is another more private room where there is another portrait of Vázquez. It also shows Pope Gregory XVI, now in the form of a bust, with Vázquez's accomplishments on the pedestal. The document is in Vázquez's hands, and it can be read. Basically, you can see that he was a minister, what he chose to have in his hand, or what people decide to portray him. We don't know when the portrait, if he was dead already. I assume that he was not, that he was already having his portrait, which is what most bishops do. They have done the portrait in life with what they want. That was not the case of Palafox, but most bishops, more recent, that's what they do. We can see the signature of Guadalupe Victoria, who was the first president of Mexico, and Lucas Alamán, who was like, let's say, secretary of foreign affairs. The cathedral minutes show that Vázquez had a bust made for Gregory XVI. He paid for it. It's made of solid marble and a very high quality manufacture. It's one of the most expensive things that the cathedral has in this type of artifact. We do not know the author, though. It is not documented in the cathedral because Vasquez paid for it. Now, I'm going to finish with this. What amazes me is how this story that I discovered just because of the pandemic, I went to Mexico, I started doubting, if the Requiem had been performed or not, and then I go back to Puebla and I continue doing this. So life takes me in these different ways, And then suddenly I go to the cathedral and because the archive is actually next to that room. So you have to go to the chapter room, and then there's like literally a hole in the wall, and you go to the archive. And that's because that was the place where they kept the coffin, where they used the coffin, where they used to keep all the monies and the most expensive things. So it's basically a hole in the wall that you could cover with a portrait, with another portrait. It amazes me how then I learned the distribution that throughout the entire 20th century, this room has had. I tried to investigate and go back and back and back in time, and the room was like that. So you see, on the one side, you see Palafox and all the luxury of Palafox and all the other, archbishops and the bust of Palafox. And on the other side, exactly on the other side, you see the bust of Clement XVI. And it's placed in a way that is almost below the portrait of Vasquez, And this is the turning point for the cathedral. I am right now studying a little bit about chapel masters, and after this moment, there is no chapel masters anymore. I mean, the economic problems that cathedrals and churches and Mexican government and everybody had to do were really very, very, very bad. So music went down for a big while at the cathedral. Thank you very much. I hope that was understood as well. Anyway, questions? No questions? I was very clear and all the pictures were able to be seen. Okay, next thing. Oh, yes.
My question is this one about the Mozart. So there's the copy in Puebla with the title page. And then there's the copy here in Mexico City with the sequence arranged, I think by Gomez or someone. Is it the same piece? Is it the same version?
I haven't seen the one in Puebla. The one in the one in Mexico. The one in Puebla is an interesting one. It's the first edition, but what happened is that Brykov did the first edition and then did another print in which it changed some of the plates. So it's the first edition, but second print that came before the next edition of the Requiem. So but it conserves everything that the first edition had. Basically.
So we can compare.
But we need to compare I don't think here the cathedral in Mexico has the first edition.
No, it's an arrangement.
Oh, it's just an arrangement. Well, no, when you find because this is the first edition, the orchestral edition. So what Plata did is he copied, and I have checked that it's really seriously, very well copied, and there are no arrangements whatsoever.
So this probably derives from it and is a version. We'll talk about it since there's a story there. Yeah, good.
Thank you, Drew. Any other question? No? Comment? Yes, please.
Just about the manuscript itself. Who did the completion? Is it Susmayer? Did Susmayer, is it in the Susmayer version?
No, it's not the Susmayer. It's the first edition by Brykov. I mean, because there was a quarrel on who would have all the editions, and if the French won, the first complete edition of Mozart was done
with
a little bit
sections
after.
from the masses and things.
It started a little bit after, but Brykov got the edition of the Requiem. So the first edition of the Requiem is by Brykov. It's not the French edition.
Thanks.
And it's not the Susmayer. Actually, it does have some mistakes. and probably it was done from some local performance. So it has its problems.
Somebody else? No?
No, okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Luisa.
You're welcome.
So, Ingeniero Zamora, now we are at your hands because it is Carolina, which I'm going to introduce. She has been waiting in Zoom, zooming out, zooming in, and so forth, but you know already. I will say some words about Carolina SACRISTÁN. She's a harpsichordist, an art historian, a full-time professor and researcher of the Technological Institute, Campus Monterrey, where she is now. That is in the north of the country. She and Antonio Ruiz, who you briefly met, and I hope you will meet more when we at the last can project the Credo. Antonio and Carolina are Musicat's pride, I must say, because they are real transdisciplinary young researchers. So they are our children. Or how do you say real? They're our pride, no? Our pride, Antonio and Carolina. So Carolina, hello. Thank you for being in and off and having this patience, like the women you are studying, copying these little pieces of paper. Yes. So please have the microphone.
Oh, hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today. I am thrilled to discuss some of my recent research with you, and I will share my screen. Just a second, please. All right, can you see my presentation? I believe you can, so I will begin. Anyone that has worked in an archive with ancient manuscript knows that after some time, handwriting becomes a very familiar element in the universe of the repertoire. During my stay in the music archive of Mexico City Cathedral, I learned to recognize the music calligraphy of some chapel masters, copyists. The traces introduced me, the traces in the manuscripts introduced me to the complex processes of music making, music arrangement, and music copying that occurred over the centuries. But I felt highly bewildered. Yes, is everything all right? I think so. But I felt highly bewildered when I came across a group of around 76 manuscripts in box 132 for the first time. These documents are remarkably different from others preserved in the Cathedral archive. The first thing that strikes the eye is the littleness. As a rule, most manuscripts can be held in the open hand. The music and the text are written in a brochure-rounded calligraphy. It is also interesting to note that these are not liturgical pieces, but short religious songs to high voices in Spanish or Latin, dating back to the late 19th and the early 20th century. Since this repertoire still needs to be addressed in music scholarship, I assume the challenge of bringing it to light in this paper. I briefly did with the difficulties of tracking help for unknown women by examining music manuscripts that, I argue, probably belong to them. I use this repertoire as a starting point to show how calligraphic studies illuminate dimensions of Mexican church history that still need to be profoundly explored. I studied the work of a music copyist involved several problems related to the complexity, uniqueness, and changeability of handwriting. There are significantly fewer studies centered on music copyists than those exploring the lives and work of composers and performers. However, the works by Javier Marín, Hillary, Diane Goldman, and Alejandro Vera underline the importance of music copyists in gaining better knowledge about various aspects of colonial music. Beyond their specific and relevant contributions, these studies remind us that the work of female copyists has been overlooked no matter when and where they lived. Perhaps the only published work addressing subjects somewhat related to women's music calligraphy is the catalog of Colección Sánchez Garza, which gathers information about the music of the former convent of La Santísima Trinidad in Puebla. This paper aims to broaden the discussion on the relevance of female copyists. I apply the method of forensic document examination to examine the music manuscripts in box 132 and insert the analysis results in a verbal evidential paradigm that enable us to disclose the possible connection with women's reviews sphere. A crucial manuscript for this study is the booklet that belonged to Maria Tellez-Giron in 1896. It can be described as a set of 1,600 pages sewn by the left edge. In the first 8 pages, the manuscript gathers elements of music theory extracted from the ABC, Teoría Musical Music Theory, by Melesio Morales. The last 8 pages contain various music exercises. Due to the nature of the first part's content, the booklet displays an array of musical symbols, words, and numbers, helpful in examining the copy's textual and music calligraphy. I take the first part of this manuscript as the specimen that serves to conduct the analysis proposed by the forensic method. The basic procedure of the script features analysis starts with determining whether there is any indication that the manuscript contains traces for more than one copyist. The booklet shows a uniform baseline, precise categories of strokes, and fine and graduated pen pressure. Nonetheless, we can observe that it gathers 4 types of step-through handwriting. One appears in the title, the second corresponds to the subtitle, the third one accompanies the music theory example, and the fourth is the final inscription. I will briefly describe only the most relevant features of these 4 sections. The most stylized calligraphy is in the title of the manuscript, most certainly because it was meant to be the first line the reader would see. In handwriting 1, the uppercase letters are made with carefully drawn flowing lines. So of course, are added as embellishments in capital E, T, and M. Capital M shows a distinctive angle top in the second curve. The lowercase letters were drawn character by character, trying to fit them perfectly inside the music state. There is the very noticeable pen lift between the circle and the line of the letter A, which also implies that it was strokes. A sharp curve from the letter D in the word there. Handwriting 1 shares some of these characteristics with handwriting 4, especially the capital T and M, and the letters composing the word A, which not only bear a close resemblance but are equally spaced. It may seem the same person wrote both texts at first glance, but the confusion might be solved by noting the unusual capital S and G, and the lowercase s, YS would see the final inscription. The rareness of these letters in these and other manuscripts in box 132 suggests that Maria Tellez-Giron was a booklet's owner, as she claimed, but not a copyist. The copies of the booklet wrote the manuscript subtitle, but this time using fluid slant to the right calligraphy that reminds the strokes of final style script. Handwriting 2 is clear and elegant, and all the letters are fluidly connected. Chorus are added as embellishments in capital A, B, and C. Lowercase m begins with a sharp loop and is used as a capital letter. Lower s consists of 2-step movements that begin with drawing a diagonal curved line that slants the letter to the right side before taking the stroke direction back to the bottom. These features are relevant to examining the words in the music theory example. Handwriting 3 is primarily made of rounded strokes that make it look different from the letters in Palmer's style. However, the most significant characteristics of handwriting 2 can also be observed in handwriting 3. See, for instance, the form of the capital letters as they appear in the words andante, cabecera, and mediante, or the letter S in the labels sobretónica, sobredominante, and subdominante. But the most distinctive features shared by handwriting 2 and handwriting 3 can be seen in the lowercase t. The horizontal line that crosses the vertical stroke of the letter on the middle line tends to be shifted forward, giving the impression of an independent stroke that sometimes is missing. The name of the copyist remains unknown, but as a preliminary conclusion, whoever the copyist was, they deliberately used 3 types of handwriting to draw distinctions among different sections of the manuscript. In contrast, the music calligraphy is consistent throughout the booklet, which helps analyze the sets of religious songs. It is broadly accepted that the person that wrote the headings and the booklet titles of the piece is usually the same and copy the music. The rounded strokes of handwriting 3 are present in the headings, movement titles, and text of the manuscripts with the religious tone. Individualizing a music copies also implies examining the general musical notation, clefs, and time signatures. The following are general statements that describe the main characteristics found in the booklet of Maria Tellez Girón. The music calligraphy is concise and not stylized. The note heads are round, and the stems are straight. The stem placement is to the right of the note head on the up stem, and to the left of the note head on the down stem. The G clefs tend to lean towards the right, and the sword often forms a circle in the middle part, as you can see here. The strokes, the quarter rest are in a left sloping standard 7 form. The quaver rests are in a right sloping standard 7 form. The strokes of the quaver system form a 40-degree angle, as you can see here. And the beam is straight and parallel when 2 or more beams are used. These features strongly prevail in the music manuscripts, even though the penmanship in this document is of a swifter nature, which may be attributed to the music copy scheme to write individual words efficiently. At this point, it is worth mentioning that the copies worked on the religious songs for around 36 years, judging by the day recorded in the booklet, that is 1896, and the fragment of a calendar of 1932 with the text of Señora Arrepentida, written in the back. Before Musicat started the cataloging project in the Cathedral archive, the manuscripts of the religious song were preserved as single and unrelated pieces. Music calligraphy was essential to realize that they most likely form part of interconnected sets, and later revealed as having been copied from 3 main sources printed in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Canciones Sacre, a collection of hymns devoted to thoughts in Latin by the form. SILVIA, o colección de oraciones y cánticos sagrados populares, and colección de cantos sagrados populares, printed in Spain in the early 20th century. Comparing the manuscripts with the books shed light on two matters. First, the pieces are incomplete. The soprano and alto parts survive in the manuscripts, but the keyboard parts are missing. Second, the pieces resulted from a systematic and selective copy based on 3 devotions: the Blessed Sacrament, Sacred Heart of Jesus, and the Virgin of Guadalupe. These devotions are clues, as proposed by Carlo Ginzburg, to connect the manuscripts with government religions. The Blessed Sacrament, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and the Virgin of Guadalupe were relevant sacred figures for the Capuchin nuns in the Viceregal period. The link between the nuns and the music is further supported by the names in some of the manuscripts. Guadalupe Bernaldez appears in the remains of an envelope that the copies used to write the text of the song for the Blessed Sacrament titled Cantemos el Amor, set into music by Sagastizabal. In December 1891 and February 1892, the Liberal Press published 2 articles pointing to Guadalupe Bernaldez as the abbess of a clandestine Capuchin nunnery in Mexico City. The dates coincide with a period of Mexican history marked by disclustration due to the liberal reforms enacted in 1979. Living a cloistered life in the decades between 1860 and 1939 was hardly forbidden and punished. When the district judge found Guadalupe Bernaldez doing inquiries, she was in a house located in Calle del Ciprés with 3 other nuns that had left the convent with her: Guadalupe Oviedo, María Torrada Mercado, and María Magdalena Bernaldez. Guadalupe Bernaldez was an older woman, seriously ill, probably of breast cancer. For that reason, she was allowed to stay in the house under the care of María Magdalena Bernaldez. Nevertheless, the church started a legal procedure against her as head of the convent, and the nuns Oviedo and Mercado were expelled. The cylinder envelope addressed to Guadalupe Bernaldez indicates that the center was in Mineral del Monte in Hidalgo, an urban center in Mexico City. As Alejandro Rosso Salas demonstrates, corresponding with the abbess was common among the Capuchins after the dissolution of the monasteries. In that way, nuns living in different cities kept the ideal of community life alive and encouraged each other to persevere in their faith. Perhaps this was the case of Guadalupe Bernaldez and the nuns under her supervision. The set of manuscripts containing 5 songs for celebrating the sacred heart of Jesus also points to the Capuchins. The back of the elegant cards commemorating the religious profession of St. Maria Margarita on the 9th of May, 1894, was used to copy music for 2 voices. There is a sonnet in the front that Maria Margarita dedicated to the mistress of novices and former teachers for Maria del Consuelo. Finally, the name of Reverend Mother Sor Maria de Jesus from Maria in Mexico City can be seen in the piece of paper with the text Cantemos un himno de Dulcinea, another song for the sake of business. Even though this manuscript must mention the Capuchins, it is worth observing that the textual and music calligraphy is that of the copyist analyzed. To conclude, I would like to say that the calligraphic study of the booklet and the music manuscripts leaves more questions than answers. Were the ABC, Maria Evangelista Morales, and the religious songs copied by a woman? Could the religious song be the music the Capuchin nuns sang in the clandestine convents? On the one hand, forensic analysis is inconclusive, and no evidence points directly to a woman as a potential copyist. In a strict sense, the names of the nuns are not enough evidence to prove that the music was copied to them, but the potential paradigm points in a different direction. On the other hand, apart from the musical setting with 2 high voices and the lack of keyboard parts suggesting that the performer could have been reading from printed books or that the keyboard was not played at all, the different kinds of reused paper employed for the manuscripts indicate that the copyist was working on the probable best conditions to teach them to sort to any available materials. Further research about the musical practices during the dissolution of the convents is needed to clarify the inquiries. Hopefully, other questions will find a response. Who was Maria Peñasquillon? Could she have been an artist of music? Was a copyist her music teacher? If the music belonged to the Capuchin nuns, how their repertoire became part of the Cathedral archive? There is only a partial answer to this concern. According to Nelly Sigo and Oscar Massin, many music manuscripts were transferred from the Sagrado Metropolitano to the Biblioteca Turriano in the early 1990s. For unknown reasons, the manuscripts of those 132 were left outside the cabinet used for storing the mythical documents. Even though they were in the library, none of these manuscripts were registered either in the music catalog published by Thomas Stamford in 2002 or the unpublished works by Salvador Valdez. All the findings derived from their inscription in the Musicat catalog call, I believe, for a rethink of our current understanding of the music Cathedral archive, it should recognize, value the presence of women. Thank you very much.
Caro, I think you are very short of time, so I don't know if somebody is interested. I think the question you can answer questions by mail, perhaps, because
yes, I can.
We're very close here. We are very
yes, no, please, if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer by email.
Yes, can you send, I don't know, we will let your email, because I'm sure there will be somebody in the public who would like would like to know more about the repertoire. So we will give your email so they can contact you directly. Is it all right? Because they have very short, okay. Thank you.
My email is right there, SACRISTÁN.
Perfecto. So you can copy the email, Carolina's email, and we just here. Opa, Carolina again. Yeah, no, it's gone. Oh, you can share. Okay, okay. So thank you very much, Carolina. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we proceed immediately to the last participation. And this is going to be Pablo OSSET, who is a journalist, a photographer, graduated in communication sciences. He is a freelancer and he collaborates in the Red Digital project. And he will, it's a pity that you didn't see the video, and we cannot share the video now again of the Credo, because we are going to put all 3 videos, Credo, Waltz, and Alabado, for a contest, in a one single documentary, and we are going to submit it to a contest at the end of the month. So we cannot leave it on the air. They must not be published before. So when they are ready, then we will send it to you, So, Pablo, you can start, if you are ready, please, because they,
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Well, good afternoon, this chaotic and strange afternoon. Well, for me, it's very, I'm very honored to share with you my thoughts. Since the early beginning, as a member of the seminar, I asked myself plenty of times, why is there the same public at lectures, academic events, and conferences? Why most of the information sounds so plain if there are uncalculated interesting hints and stories that surrounds each human topic behind the academic walls? Are researchers speaking to other researchers engaged in a depth dialogue where everyone has the truth? And how about the others? Those who are outside of the academic world? Well, significant dissemination is the answer. It's significant insofar that the essence of the object of study and the essence of the person who works on it and the essence of those who will get to know it, all those essence must be bound by emotion and its dissemination because of its capacity to spread knowledge. Imagen 2. Well, cultural heritage, whereas rich, poor, scarce, well-made, rough, ugly, naive, etc., it's ours. And we have a responsibility to take care of it only by the fact that we are using it for our own purposes. When we approach the subject of interest in a respectfully and sensitive manner, in that moment starts the path of significant dissemination. This approach must be in a humble way. How do we make interesting something that at first sight appears boring? Having in mind that everything has a story to be told? Emotion, that is the key. Carl Sagan, William Attenborough, both worldwide known, and Julieta Fierro and René Drucker, very well known in Mexico, all of them coming from the science world, create characters with humanity, making a bond between us and the cosmos and between us and nature. Why is not possible in musicology or history or mathematics? Core books, members of the Cathedral Council, composers, and the music itself are characters with his own stories. And we have honestly to ask us, who am I speaking to? Who is going to answer me? And what kind of reaction shall I get? Researchers get so focused that they enclosure themselves in the archives, forgetting how to communicate their findings. In doing so, the possible dialogue between them, the subject of study, and us ends in a monologue. Our research brings facts. These facts become information, and this information, after a systematic work and many bureaucratic steps, becomes a work of reference. And that's it. But we have another path. And it's when the research starts with an emotion. And this emotion led us to facts. And those facts thrill us and move us to action, giving birth to a product intended to the public. This is how the significant dissemination path leads us from the archives to the outside world. Samham's EROT for interpretation. Every researcher must act as interpreter, since knowing the language of his object of study must a social task presented to a public. And how must that interpretation be? Enjoyable. Enjoyable for us and for the other. Relevant while being meaningful and personal for both. We are the others. Organized in an attractive way, and thematic more than topic. That is going from the general to the particular. Freeman Tilden said that any interpretation that does not relate what is being showed or described to something within the user's personality or experience is sterile. The information as such is not interpretation. There are completely different things. However, all interpretation includes information. Interpretation is an art which combines many other arts, no matter what materials are presented. Any art is to some degree teachable. The main goal of interpretation is not instruction, but provocation. The interpretation should aim to present a whole rather than a part, and should address the whole man rather than one of his faces. Interpretative writing is one of the skills that a researcher has to communicate to the other. And interpretative writing draws from technical, informational, scientific, historical, and cultural sources and incorporates creative techniques as building memorable characters, giving intangible meanings to tangible sources, and creating a conflict to impress people. Here go some tips. Address the reader in the first person, make it personal. Use active rather than passive verbs. Use metaphor, analogies, and comparisons with popular or common reference. Feel free to use the goldmine of pop culture. Humor. Don't be afraid to provoke a smile. First person narrative. Make you yourself responsible. And short sentences, big ideas. Avoid jargon and technical terms. It's better to use your own words to define complex terms or situations. Keep in mind how you would like to be taught. And please, question and engage your audience imagination. Those different skills and premises led us to act out of the box or the books. Every subject of interest is surrounded by many living voices, and each voice is a story. Sharing knowledge, working in peer groups, collaborating in an interdisciplinary way, all three bases for not being isolated and for creating a virtuous circle of knowledge. And last but not less important, compel your institutions to promote new narratives as those you are creating. The researcher as an agent of change. In spite of being a postmodern term used to evaluate in a quantitative way the social response to a public influencer activity, I believe that those meaningless words have sense when we give them life. What is an agent of change? It's an emotional champion. Through an emotional bond, anything becomes personal. Why is it significant for me? Why is it significant for the other? But please be aware of never losing an academic ethos. It's forbidden to manipulate the facts in order to thrill the public. It's a developmental strategist. Through interdisciplinary workshops, organized work groups are created for each specific project to produce a work. It's an intuitive adapter. As social science and arts have a strong bond with the field work, the researcher can adapt at diverse circumstances with diverse investigation techniques, including the relation with the living sources. And it's a continuous improver, always looking for new paradigms or lines of research linking the past with the present and the present with a future solution that is preserve and disseminate our cultural heritage. Musicat as a paradigm of working progress. From the archives to creativity, Musicat's digital network has developed a paradigm of work and production of academic resources for non-specific public following the next premises. Everything is presented in an interdisciplinary workshop. Each member embraces a particular issue to develop and work side by side with the other members of the workshop in order to look for an audiovisual reference, write a script, realize a formal research, or build a profile character. In those workshops, each line is rewritten, rethought, and translated to a multi-narrative speech. The researcher is always welcome to inspire the workshop with emotion, acknowledge his topic, or invite the workshop to meet the subject. A creative team following the researcher develop an audiovisual product, always aiming to arouse an emotive response of the public. Each one of the different processes is communicated to the whole seminar in a show and tell exercise, so many voices and knowledge build a fertile zone for research and dissemination. Thank you very much.
I think also there is no time for questions, but Pablo has made a good propaganda of our page, yes, our website, where you can see our how do we go from the very dry catalogs and other publications to the last videos, which are taking in consideration all these dissemination, yes, is significant dissemination, which we are absolutely now fully engaged. So I leave the closing words to Martin, please.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you again, Professor Enríquez, all of today. We're very sorry. Today goes the best day plans. Always border on. But I think we all the enormous set of insight. So, I think this I'll just put an announcement here on another time right here. We have to exercise like 5, otherwise,